Hello and welcome to this video tutorial brought to you by tastytudes.com. In this tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate how you can create a polygonal portrait in Adobe Photoshop with the aid of Adobe Illustrator. So this is an example I have prepared earlier. I have this portrait of a woman here. Next, I have an image of a wasp. Next, I have an example of Captain Picard, and here I have chosen to break some of the polygon shapes out of the face, leaving the strokes behind. Next, I have taken inspiration from a scarlet macaw parrot, and again I have broken the polygons away. And lastly, I have the same portrait as earlier, but with a different colour treatment, and in this example you can clearly see the stroke lines between the polygon shapes. Now, if you wish to take a closer look at these examples and the work documents to get a better understanding how these were created, you can find them in the downloadable project folder. The link is in the description. Now, to create all of these examples, I used the same technique, which I will be demonstrating in this tutorial. So, to follow along with this tutorial, you are going to need Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator. Now, the reason for this is because I'm going to use specific tools from both Photoshop and Illustrator to create this kind of artwork. Now, for this tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate how I took this image, this portrait of a woman here on the left, and converted it into this polygonal image on the right. If you wish to have a go at this yourself and follow along, you can download the source image, and you can find this in the downloadable project folder. The link is in the description. Now, before I begin, I must stress that there is no quick way of creating this artwork. Currently, there is no filter in Illustrator or Photoshop that can create this polygonal effect. We are going to have to create this from scratch, and depending on which image you want to use, it's going to take a little time to create. To create this kind of artwork, you're going to need a little patience and determination, but I can guarantee by the end, you will be happy with your achievement. Now, in this video, I'm going to demonstrate a technique that works really well for me. And to help you, I'm going to break it all down so you can understand the process and easily create this kind of artwork for yourself. So basically, my technique works in 5 main steps. Step 1, preparation. Step 2, tracing. Step 3, convert strokes to paths in Photoshop. Step 4, colouring. And step 5, finishing touches. Now, if you wish to come back at any time or skip ahead on the timeline to any one of these steps, you can find the times for each of these steps in the description. Okay, so with all that said, let's get into it and make a start. So let's begin with step 1, preparation. Now, in this stage, we are going to set up a document and prepare our composition, which we will be using as the base of our final artwork. So here in Photoshop, the first thing we need to do is set up a document. So I'm going to press Command N to create a new document. I'm going to choose an A3 document size, and I'm going to set the resolution to 300 dpi. Now this is going to make a nice big document for us to create some nice high quality artwork in. Okay, so with my new document set up, next I'm going to open up the image I wish to work with. So I'm going to navigate to my project folder, and in the 01 Toot Docs folder, in the Assets folder, I'm going to open Model JPEG. With my image open in Photoshop, I'm going to copy and paste the image into my new document like so, and then proceed to position it where I want it. Now, depending on the quality of the image you're using, you're going to need to either scale your image up or down. In my case, I'm going to scale my image up. I'll press Command T and click and drag on one of the corners while holding Shift and Alt, and I'll scale it up nicely. Now, it's important at this stage to get your composition correct. It's going to be difficult to change this later on, so be sure to create a composition you are happy with. So once my image is in place, I'm going to double click on the image layer and rename this to Image Ref. Then with the layer selected, I'm going to click on the lock icon. This is going to stop me from editing this layer in any way by mistake in future. So once everything is in place and I'm happy with my composition, I'm going to save my document. On this occasion, I'm going to save my document to the project folder, and I'm going to call this polygon face. So that concludes the preparation stage. Once you are happy with your composition and you have saved your document, it's time to move into the next step. Step 2, tracing. So in this next stage, we are going to use Adobe Illustrator to trace our image to create the polygon shapes using the pen tools. Now, we are going to use Illustrator for this task as the pen tool functionality is vastly superior to that in Photoshop. Using Illustrator is going to help us get an accurate trace and modify our paths later. By the end of this stage, we will end up with something that looks like this. As you can see here, I have the outlines of all the shapes which I have previously created. Here I can toggle the visibility of the image layer to see the strokes that make up the composition. If you wish to take a closer look at this example for reference, you can find this in the project folder. Link is in the description. Now, it's these shapes that we will eventually bring into Photoshop to create the color effects and finalize the artwork. So let's start the tracing stage. So here I am in Adobe Illustrator, and the first thing I need to do is come to File, Open, and now I'm going to open the Photoshop document I just created. With the document open, I should have something that looks like this. Now the reason I have opened up the Photoshop document is because now I have a mirror image of my original Photoshop document. So this document is to the same scale and size as my previous Photoshop document. And you will see why later in the tutorial why this is crucial. So before we begin to trace, I need to prepare the layers to make the conditions better for tracing. So if we come into the layers panel, we should now see the layer image ref, which we previously named in Photoshop. So with the selection tool, I'm going to select this image and open my transparency panel. If you cannot see your transparency panel, you can come up to Window and select this from the drop-down menu. Okay, so with the image selected and my transparency panel visible, I'm going to change the transparency of this image down to 60%. So this is basically going to fade my image away slightly. Now, I'm carefully going to click on the lock icon next to the visibility icon in the layers panel. This will stop me from selecting or editing this layer in future. Next, I'm going to press Command L, and this is going to create a new layer in my layers panel. With this new layer, I'm going to come over to the side menu and select the rectangle tool. Then I'm simply going to draw a box over my image like so. And with this box selected, I'm going to make sure that the fill color in the menu is set to black. So now I should have a solid black box on top of my image. So with the object selected, I'm going to come to the transparency panel and change the opacity of this black box to 20%. So now I can see my image through the shade of grey. So next I'm going to double click on this layer and call it grey and click the lock icon next to the visibility icon. So now I have the faded image in the background with a grey transparent layer on top. So now we have the ideal conditions to begin to trace the image. So back in the layers panel, I'm going to press Command L once again, and this will create a new layer. This time I'm going to double click on the layer name and call this Trace. Great, so now we can begin to trace our image. Now before we begin, I'm going to save my document in the project folder and name it Trace. Okay, so to start, I'm going to zoom right in. Now you can start wherever you like, but I like to start from the middle of the face, on the bridge of the nose, and work my way around. So I'm going to press P on the keyboard to activate the pen tool. Now before I start clicking away, I'm going to make sure that in my menu the fill color is set to none. If yours has a color, we can set this to none by first clicking the fill color to select it, and then carefully click the box below with the red stripe on. By clicking this, we will now have the fill color set to none. Make sure the red arrow is through your fill color. Next, I'm going to set the stroke color to white. I can do this by clicking the stroke square, and if it's not already set to white, I can double click and choose a white color from the spectrum. Next, I will want to set my stroke size. Now, if you cannot see your stroke panel, you can come up to Window and select yours there. Once I can see the stroke panel, I'm going to click on the drop down and change the stroke size to 0.5. So this is going to make a nice thin white stroke when I start to trace my face. Excellent. Okay, so with the trace layer selected in the layers panel and our brush set up, now comes the tricky part. Now we can begin tracing the face. Now, the general rule when creating this kind of artwork is that we are going to be working in triangles as much as possible. Each shape we make needs to have 3 points. Now, as we dive into some of the details, we can use other shapes, but 90% of the time we will be creating triangle shapes with 3 points. So I'm going to start in the middle of the forehead here, and I'm simply going to start by clicking once to place my first point, again for my second point, again for my third, and lastly I'm going to move my mouse cursor over the first point, and when I see the little circle icon appear, this is Illustrator telling me I can click to create a complete shape. And upon click, I have now created my first shape outline. Now, if for any reason I'm not happy with that shape, I can simply press A to activate the direct selection tool and click and drag a point to move it around into another position like so. To continue drawing shapes, I can press P to activate the pen tool. So as soon as we have created the shape, we are going to create another. Now currently, our stroke is currently still active on the previous shape. So I'll press Command-Shift-A to deselect the shape stroke. And this will allow me to click on the edge of the shape I just created, on the top of the stroke. Then I'll click to place a new point, then click back on the corner point of my previous shape, and just like earlier, click back on the first point to complete the shape. So now I have 2 shapes, and we can see that 2 paths that make up the 2 shapes are now overlapping here. So I'm going to make another shape. So I'll press Command-Shift-A to deselect the previously made shape, and this time I'll try another shape here like so. And just like that, I have created another shape, and I'll press Command-Shift-A to deselect. Now keep in mind that every time you click on the corner of the previously made shape, try and get it exactly on top, or as close as possible. You want to be as neat as you can, as this is going to save you some time in the long run. So this is the technique I'm going to use to go around my face to draw the shapes. What you want to do is use the image below as a reference to trace the structure of the face around the nose, eyes and the jawline to get an accurate resemblance. Now, it's completely up to you how big you want to create your polygon shapes. The smaller your polygons, the more detail you can capture, but that will result in more work you will need to do later when you come to colouring your artwork. So I'm going to continue to create more polygon shapes down the nose, being careful to create complete shapes and overlap them together on the strokes like so. Once one polygon is created, I am going to create another one immediately next to it, building a web of polygon shapes until they grow outwards and cover the surface of my image. What you must achieve at this stage are shapes that sit exactly side by side. Now don't worry too much at this point about being too perfect. If you do make any mistakes along the way, such as not accurately connecting your points and accurately overlapping your strokes, you can always clean this up later. I will be using the pen tools in Illustrator to clean up any errors later, and I'll be showing you how to do that shortly. So after a little while, I will have something that looks like this. So here I have most of my face covered in polygon shapes. Now, I have left off the mouth and eyes, as that is a little tricky. I'll come back to that later. Now, if you look carefully, you can see where in some areas the polygon shapes are smaller than others. For example, around the eyes here, I have chosen to create smaller and more intricate polygon shapes in order to capture the detail and definition of the face. You can also see the same is for the nose area and around the lips. Now, on the forehead and the cheeks, I have used larger shapes as there is less detail here. So keep in mind, if you want to show more detail and definition on the face structure, you may wish to use smaller polygon shapes. Now be sure to save your document as you make progress tracing your image. So I'm going to continue to draw polygons expanding into the hair region. And I'm going to use the image below as a reference, though I can be a little wacky here and create various shapes and sizes of my polygon shapes to get a more abstract feel. Here I am aiming to get a variety of shapes. So after a little while, I will have something that looks like this. So now I have the hair area traced. Here I have used a combination of large and small polygon shapes to try and reflect the movement of the hair in the image below. Here we can see how I have structured my polygon shapes over the sections of colour. This detail is going to make for an interesting outcome later when we come to colour the artwork. So now I'm going to come down and continue to draw polygon shapes expanding down under the face, on the neck, and on the clothing area. So after a little while, I will have something that looks like this. Now I have the neck and the clothing sections complete. So now I'm almost finished with the tracing. Now you can see all I have left are the eyes, mouth and the earrings. On this occasion, I have left these till last as they are the most tricky parts to trace. So I'm going to zoom right in on the eyes and start to work from the outside in. Now here I'm going to break the rules a little to capture some of the detail and intricacy of the eyes. I'm going to create small polygon shapes, and some of them are not going to connect on the edges like most of the other shapes. And that's looking pretty cool. Again, be sure to save your document as you make progress tracing your image. So I'm quickly going to pan over to the other eye and trace this in. I'm going to move down to the lips, and working from the outside in, I'm going to trace the lips like so. And then move down and build the polygons to create the earrings. And after a little while, I will finally have my image traced in Adobe Illustrator. So now we are starting to make some serious progress. Once you have covered your image in polygon shapes, the last thing we need to do is clean up the strokes. Now, if like me, as you build your shapes, you're going to start to lose patience, as it does get a little tedious. Now, along the way, you may find you make a few little errors, and some of your strokes won't line up correctly. So now it's time to clean up those little mistakes. So what I'm going to do now is press Command Y on the keyboard. Now this is going to convert our view to outline view. So no matter what the stroke size you are working with, you will now see them as pixel lines. This is going to clearly reveal and expose all those little errors in our strokes. So now if I zoom in, I can see some of the polygon corners and strokes are not overlapping correctly. For example, if I zoom in here, we can see that the points of these shapes are not matching up. So to quickly rectify this, by pressing A on the keyboard, we can activate the Direct Selection tool. If I click and drag an area over the points like so, upon release, I will select all of them. With these points selected, I can come up to the top control panel and click the Horizontal Align Center button, and this will then align all the points to the center. Then I can come back up into the control panel and then select the Vertical Align Center button, and then this will align all the points vertical. So by using those two align tools in the control panel, you will accurately align those points up perfectly on top of each other. So keeping that technique in mind, I'm going to move around my polygon artwork and look for more errors. And when I see them, I can click and drag over them like so and hit the alignment buttons in the control panel, and that will quickly and easily align my points accurately. Now, on some occasions, you may find that some shapes just don't align or connect accurately, so simply click on the point and drag it onto the lines like so. So after a little while of going through your artwork, you will hopefully have a near perfect composition where all your strokes line up on top of each other. Once you're happy, save the document and press Command Y to go back to the preview mode. So now you can see why we have used Illustrator for this stage. Illustrator offers us the pen tools and the ability to edit our points very effectively and efficiently, especially when using the Align tools up in the control panel. So once you feel happy with your trace and certain it's all accurate, it's time to move on to the next stage. Step 3. Convert strokes to paths in Photoshop. So in this next stage, we are going to come back into Photoshop and use the strokes we just created in Illustrator and convert them into paths in Photoshop. So back in Photoshop, after you have traced your image in Illustrator, you want to open back up the original image you created in the first step. So here I have my polygon face document. Now before we do anything else, I need to locate my paths panel. Now, if you cannot see your paths panel, come to Window, scroll down and select paths from there. Now, I strongly advise you keep your paths panel visible like this, separate, on its own and easily accessible. You're about to find out why. Okay, great. Now, come back into Illustrator to our traced image and zoom right out so you can see all the artwork. I'm going to press V to activate the selection tool, and then click and drag over the entire artwork to essentially select all the strokes. Then I'm going to press Command C to copy. Next, I'm going to come back into Photoshop to my document. So now I'm going to come into the Paths panel, click on the top right hand menu and click New Path. I'm going to name this path to Trace and click OK. Now we will see a grey thumbnail in the Paths panel. So next I'm going to press Command V. What we're about to do here is paste our strokes from Illustrator into Photoshop. Now upon pressing Command V, you will get a paste menu. Here we have 4 options. From this option, we need to select Path. So make sure to select Path, and with Path selected, click OK, and boom. Just like that, we have created a new path in our Photoshop document, and now you will see the thumbnail in our Paths panel reflect this. So now it should make perfect sense why we started in Photoshop, opened our document in Illustrator, traced the polygons, and now we are back in Photoshop. This path will match the image perfectly. But notice now how the path is a little out of sync from the artwork, or the image ref. So I'm going to realign the paths to match the image reference layer below. So just like in Illustrator, if we press A on the keyboard, we can activate the Direct Selection tool. Or you can come to the bottom of the menu, click and hold on the Path Selection tool and select the Direct Selection tool. So with the Direct Selection tool, I can now click and drag over all the path and then use the arrow keys to move the path accurately over the image like so. Excellent. Now, if at any point I want the path to go away, I can press P on the keyboard to activate the pen tool and press Enter on the keyboard. Now, if I want the path to reappear, simply click on the thumbnail in the Paths panel. So with the pen tool active, press Enter to make the path go away, and simply click back on the thumbnail to bring them back. Now keep this in mind as you will be doing this a lot very shortly. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in here like so. Now if I press A on the keyboard and click on Align, we can see that this path is not simply one path, but this one path layer in our Paths panel consists of many paths. All the shapes we built in Illustrator are now paths in Photoshop, and now we can begin to click and select all the shapes individually. So all the hard work has built up to give us this path layer in Photoshop. So now we can move on to the next step and use these paths to begin to create color. Step 4. Coloring. So by the end of this stage, you will end up with something that looks like this. I am now going to use the paths to isolate various parts of the image ref below, extract colours, and create gradient polygon shapes. If you wish to take a closer look at this example for reference, you can find this in the project folder, link is in the description. So let's begin with the colouring stage. So the first thing I'm going to do is come into the layers panel, and here we have the image ref layer, which is currently locked, which was done when we originally set up the document. So I'm going to press Command-Shift-N to create a new layer, and I'm going to name this layer Face Color. With this new layer created, I can now begin to create the colored polygons. And just like how I traced the image, I'm going to start from the middle of the face and work my way out. So when I'm ready to begin creating colour, I will click on the paths thumbnail, and this will reveal all my paths. With my paths visible, I will press A on the keyboard to activate the direct selection tool. So I'm going to place my mouse cursor over the stroke and click once. Now you will get an indication of which shape you have selected by the circles that appear on the points of the shape. Now you will have to be careful here and click around a few times in order to get the shape you want. Remember, these strokes overlap, so sometimes you may select the shape you don't want. So you may have to try clicking on various stroke sides of a shape until you select the shape you want. So once I have the shape I want, I'm going to right click on the mouse to pull up a menu. From the menu, I'm going to select Make Selection, and up will pop a menu. Be sure to have your feather radius set to 0 and make sure anti-aliased is ticked, then press OK. Now you will see a selection appear and the paths will disappear. So with the selection active, I'm going to press I on the keyboard. Now this is going to activate the Eyedropper tool. So now I'm going to select two colours from this selection, from the image ref image below. Now generally, I choose a colour from one end and a colour from the other end to create a gradient. So I'm going to click to select a colour. Now notice in the menu, that colour is set to the foreground colour. Now if I press X on the keyboard, notice how the foreground colour switches to the background colour. By pressing X on the keyboard, you can quickly switch your foreground and background colours in your menu. Okay, so I'm going to press X to set my most recent colour selection to the background, and with the Eyedropper tool still active, I'm going to select a new colour. So now I have two shades in my menu. Next, I'm going to press G on the keyboard. Now this will activate the Paint Bucket tool, but here we do not want to use the Paint Bucket tool, we want to use the Gradient tool. So I'm going to come into the menu and click and hold on the Paint Bucket tool and select the Gradient tool. So now in the selection area, I'm going to click and drag like so. And what I'm going to do here is attempt to reflect the colour from the reference image below. What you have to think about here is to try and capture the essence of the image below. We are not going to know what the outcome will be, so it's a bit of an unpredictable creative adventure. Only having two colours is going to simplify the colour outcome, but that's what will give this artwork the interesting look and feel. So if you click and drag to create the gradient, but you're not happy with it the first time, press Command Z to undo. Then click and drag to create the gradient again. If you're not happy, press Command Z and keep repeating this process until you get the colour effect you're happy with. Okay, so once I'm happy with the gradient, I'm going to press Command D to deselect the active selection. And that creates the first shape. So next I'm going to press A to activate the direct selection tool. Click on the paths layer in the paths panel, and that will reveal the paths back. Next, I'm going to try and select the shape right next to the new gradient shape I just created. With that selected, I'm going to right click and make selection. Click OK, or press Enter on the keyboard. With the new selection, I'm going to press I to activate the Eyedropper tool, and from the image ref, I'm going to select a shade from the area. Then I will press X on the keyboard to swap the colour in the menu. Then I will select a new colour from the image below. Then I'll press G to activate the gradient tool. I will then click and drag in the selection to create a gradient effect. And if I'm not happy with the first attempt, I'll press Command Z and click and drag to create another gradient. Once I'm happy, I will press Command D to deselect the area, and that creates the second gradient shape. So using that exact process, I'm going to continue around my face and colour in each shape. Now, it will help you to remember the keyboard shortcuts and the process order, as this will speed things up for you. So remember these shortcuts, and these are also specified in the description. Press A to activate the direct selection tool. Select the path layer in the paths panel to show the paths. Select a path by clicking on the line or very near the line. Be sure to look at the circles on the edge of the shape to see which shape you have selected. Right click and make selection. Press enter. Press I to activate the eyedropper tool. Select a colour from one end of the selection area. Press X to toggle the colours in the menu. Select another colour from the other end of the current selection. Press G to activate the gradient tool. Click and drag a direction to create a gradient inside the selection. If you're not happy, press Command Z to undo. Create the new gradient. And once happy, press Command D to deselect the selection, and then do the process over and over again. So I'm going to proceed around the face image, selecting the individual path shapes from the paths layer, selecting two colors from within the selection area, and use the gradient tool to create a gradient effect inside. Now, this will take a little time to do, but trust me, it will all be worth it in the end when you end up with a really cool piece of artwork. Now, sometimes you may find an instance where you do not have a path created for a particular shape. It is quite easy to miss a shape when tracing the image in Illustrator. Now, if you ever find yourself with this problem, simply use the Polygonal lasso tool in the menu to draw your shape. Now, you should be able to use the paths around as a guide to accurately draw the shape like so. And then proceed with the selection. Use the same process of selecting the colors and using the gradient tool to fill in the selection. Once happy, press Command D to deselect and continue to color in the other shapes. So after a while of repeating this process, I will have something that looks like this. So as you can see here, I have the face colored in. Now I have left out the eyes and mouth for the time being, as they are quite small details, which I will work on a little later. Now, if I come to the Layers panel, I can toggle the visibility of the image ref layer and begin to see the artwork in its own right. So using the gradient technique, I am beginning to capture some nice colour effects around the eyes and on the cheeks. It's starting to look interesting. So I'll toggle back the image ref and proceed into the hair area using the exact method as before, selecting the individual path shapes from the paths layer, selecting two colors from within the selection area, and using the gradient tool to create a gradient effect inside. Should I encounter any areas that do not have a path stroke, I will use the lasso tool to create the shape using the gradient tool to fill. And after a little while of repeating this process, I will have something that looks like this. So now I have the hair area colored in. If I toggle the visibility of the ref image, I can see this artwork is beginning to come along and look pretty cool. Now we have some interesting light effects going on in this area. Notice how we trace the sections of color in Illustrator, so it's beginning to show nicely here in the colored outcome. This is beginning to look pretty graphic now. So I'll toggle back in the image ref and then proceed down under the face, around the neck, and in the clothes area. After a little while of repeating this process, I will have something that looks like this. So now I have almost completed my artwork. All that's left to do now is zoom in and focus on the small details. So I'll come into the eye section here and zoom right in. Using the same process, I'll select my areas and carefully choose my colors and apply the gradients like so. Once the eyes are complete, I'll move down into the mouth section. With the mouth complete, I'll move into the earring section. And after a little while, I will have something that looks like this. And now all my face image is complete. So once you have completed the colouring of your face, it's time to move on to the last step. Step 5. Finishing touches. So in this stage, I'm simply going to clean up my artwork. I'm going to look around the artwork for any errors or polygon shapes that do not overlap. Now, you may find you have some white gaps between your polygon shapes, like this. If you too have this issue, then to remove this, I'm simply going to use the Polygonal lasso tool to carefully select the shape that is containing the white gap. With the selection, I'm going to use the Eyedropper tool to select the two colours that make up the gradient inside the selection. Then I will switch back to the gradient tool and recreate the gradient effect inside. Now this will overwrite the old colour effect and patch over the white gap that existed before. So I'm simply going to go around my artwork and use this technique until I'm happy that my artwork is nice and clean. So that completes my polygonal portrait colour effect. So now I'm going to add a background to my artwork. I'm going to press Command-Shift-N to create a new layer, and I'll call this background. With my new layer, I'm going to come into the colour menu and click on the foreground colour and set this to FEFF62, a nice yellow colour there. Next, I'll click on the background colour and go for FEB2F7. With my two colours, I'll choose my gradient tool and click and drag to make a nice gradient. And then I'll drag this layer below my face colour layer, and that completes my polygonal portrait artwork. Now, if you have made it this far and created your own polygonal artwork, there are some extra effects you may be interested in. And for this, I'm going to show you how you can quickly create a different colour effect like this example here. So I'm going to come back into the artwork I just created. I'm going to come up to the main menu, come to Image and select Duplicate. I'll rename this to Color Effect 1, click OK, and this will duplicate the entire Photoshop composition. So with this new document, I'm going to select the face color layer. With layer selected, I'm going to come to the bottom of the layers panel and click the Create Adjustment layer. And from here, I'm going to choose Hue Saturation. Upon click, my Properties panel will appear, and I'm going to click and drag the saturation right the way to the left, like so. This will turn my image into what looks like black and white. Now, you will notice that this is also applying to every layer below the Adjustments layer. So in the Properties panel, I'll click the Clip button at the bottom of the Adjustments panel to only apply this adjustment layer to the immediate layer below. Though on this occasion, I'm going to toggle the visibility of the background layer to off. So next, I'm going to come to the Tutorial Assets folder in the Project folder and open up the color image. With this open, I'm going to press Command A to select all, Command C to copy, and Command W to close the document. Back in my new document, I'm going to press Command V to paste. Now, on this occasion, my image is too small, so I'm going to press Command T to activate Free Transform. Then, I'm going to scale the image up like so, holding Shift and Alt on the keyboard while dragging the top right corner out like so. Now, once the coloured image is on top of my polygonal image below, I'm going to press and hold Command on the keyboard and click on the thumbnail image of the face colour layer. This will create a selection around the outside of the layer like so. With this selection, I'm going to select the coloured layer and click on the Add Layer Mask icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. With the new layer mask applied, I'll select the thumbnail of the coloured layer and then come into the Layers panel and add a new blending mode to this layer. To this colour layer, I'm going to apply a blending mode of colour, and boom! Now we have an interesting colour effect applied to our image below. though this is looking a little intense to me, so I'll bring the opacity of this layer down to say 60%, and that's looking pretty cool. Now, if however you wish to experiment with a different color choice, simply press Command U on the keyboard with the color layer selected and scroll with the hue handle until you get a color you're happy with. Pretty cool, right? Now, for a final effect, I have a different color treatment, and this example you can clearly see the stroke lines between the polygon shapes. So to do this, I'm going to use this same example. So on top of the colored layer, I'm going to press Command Shift N to create a new layer, and I'll call this Strokes. So with the new layer selected, I'll press B to activate the brush tool. Then I'm going to come up into the control panel and modify the brush. So first I'm going to click on the brush preset picker, select a solid brush, and then set the brush size to 4 pixels. This is going to create a nice thin stroke. Next, I need to set the brush color. So I'll click on the foreground color in the menu and select a white color from the spectrum. So next, I'm going to press A on the keyboard and select the paths thumbnail in the paths panel. This will then reveal the paths. Next, I'm going to move the mouse over the paths, right click, but this time select Stroke Paths. Up will pop a stroke path option. From this menu, I'm going to toggle down and select brush, and then click OK. And upon click, you will create a stroke layer. To remove the visibility of the paths, simply press P on the keyboard and then press Enter. And now you will have white strokes on top of your image, and this looks pretty cool. So that, my friends, is how you can create a polygonal portrait in Adobe Photoshop with the aid of Illustrator. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. If you liked the tutorial, hit the like button on my Facebook page. If you'd like to see more videos like this in future, hit the subscribe button. Don't forget, you can download the documents you saw in this tutorial. All links are in the description. Well, that's it for another video, brought to you by tastytudes.com. Thanks for watching. Have fun, guys, be creative, and I'll see you next time.